Welcome, Joe Telford. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me back on, or thank you for inviting me for this conversation. Obviously, we talked about a month ago now, something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was on your channel, yeah, but there was,
hmm
yeah, at the time I thought you were coming on mine. You thought I was coming on yours. So yeah, you're back on, I'm back on.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's all good. Yeah, yeah. I'm excited to talk about some more old world stuff and whatever weird topics you want to get into.
Sounds good. The first thing I wanted to ask you was, when did Tartaria come onto your radar?
Oh, I would probably say so when I kind of had my awakening, kind of spiritually, and just the realization that everything we've been taught is basically wrong. And I was kind of going back, building myself up spiritually, reading my Bible, connecting with God, and then I eventually started to consume all the kind of conspiracy content that you find on all the apps, TikTok and YouTube and all the stuff, podcasts, and it was probably about so late 2021. I made my first TikTok, and I was talking about kind of end times eschatology, potentially like the mark of the beast and all this kind of stuff from the Bible, prophecies coming
Yeah,
true. And when I started to do that, I gained a following pretty fast on TikTok, and and as I did that, I was like, oh, I guess I should just talk about the things that I find kind of the most mind-blowing conspiracies that I learned, because I can only talk about so much about one subject, and I was just like everybody else probably who like to watch my videos, is that we're going down the rabbit hole. Nope, guess what? This is wild too. This is crazy. This connects with this and this connects with that. And but I did have kind of this focus on like the current, new world order type conspiracy happening
yeah.
that can lead to, a totalitarian, world government that would
Mm.
be run by, the Antichrist. But as I'm doing that, I really liked symbolism in kind of the movies and in architecture and things like that. And so that's mainly what I was doing. But what so happens when I'm sure when you have a podcast or if you're just making content about stuff like that, people would say, "Oh, you need to talk about the mud flood. Oh, you need to talk about
Yeah.
Tartaria." And I remember just kind of pushing it aside because I saw some stuff about it, but I really was like I didn't really know what to do with it, and it was so I probably resisted talking about it probably for over a year because I was like, "That's weird," but I really don't know what to say about it. I guess because I was too busy focusing on what I was learning at the time. Like you
Yeah.
can't learn everything at one time. So I kind of put it aside, and it wasn't really until somebody did pose that question about what if these old world buildings, Tataria or whatever, what if that is a evidence that the millennial reign of Christ already happened? And that's
Mm.
when it was like, okay, so that really caught my attention now because now it started to intersect in the stuff that I was talking about. And then I thought, for better or for worse, I needed to research it in order to either say, well, first off, I was trying to debunk it to say that it wasn't that.
Oh, were you?
Yeah, because I guess because again, I'm grew up in a non-denominational Christian church, and so we are looking forward to the return of Christ, right? So to say it
Of
didn't is it already
course.
happened? It's not something you really would want to believe. I think
Mm.
for most people. And so, and plus, I'm talking about this stuff's all going to happen. So it's kind of like everything that I've been talking about would be wrong if this is true. So, but I mean, I think it's kind of like how I viewed a lot of conspiracy theories, like especially like biblical cosmology or flat Earth,
Yeah.
which is, I mean, I went to school. I'm a college graduate, and I've learned, I've been educated. So I do know that when you talk about certain topics that are really kind of fringe, or at least fringe in your community, some people are not going to take you seriously if you start talking about stuff. So like if somebody
Mm.
questioned me about flat Earth, I would say, well, the first thing I did, I was trying to say no. It's obviously a ball. It's obviously a sphere, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna try to disprove this. But the more I tried to disprove it, the more I was like, I don't know. I don't think that I can disprove it. And then I was revisiting the scriptures, and the people were challenging me on what it said, and I was like, you know what, I kind of got to give them credit for pointing that out. Like it does look like the Bible does indicate that it's not a spinning ball.
Yes,
For
certainly does.
now,
Yeah.
now the ultimate shape and dimension of the Earth, I don't know that it's that clear about what it is, but I know what it's
Mm,
not, and what it's
mm.
not is what they teach us. And
Yes.
so then eventually I had to kind of come to grips with that of saying like, well, some people are not going to, they're going to think I'm stupid now. They're going to think I'm crazy because if I say that I believe what the Bible says over what the science says, then then I'm going to lose some people. But if I care what's true, and if that's what I'm doing here is trying to go on this truth journey and trying to reveal what I've learned, then I have to be honest about it. Otherwise, I'm just like I'm just like the mainstream media that we all say lies to us.
Yes.
And because it's either lies by either outright fabrications or lies by omission. So if you learn something you believe to be true and you just keep it from people because you're worried about what they'll say, or yeah, or like eventually like some people who do what I do and they make money doing it, if you're worried about your bank account or your clout, then you don't want it to be true. So yeah, so I mean, I guess I'm kind of a skeptical person just naturally, so I don't latch on
Mm,
to every conspiracy theory either. So if I don't trust the news, why would I trust just random people on the internet talking
yeah.
just nonsense? That was it. So I tried to kind of disprove a lot of it, but I was still just kind of left with, okay, I don't know that it's evidence of the millennial reign, but I don't know what it is then. So
Yeah.
I was still kind of stuck with, still kind of stuck with that. And I think the more I started to look into it, I was like, there's something huge here. Whatever it is, it's absolutely massive. And I think from a Bible believing Christian, it really doesn't fit in the future eschatology that all these things are going to come later, because the Bible kind of ends with things are going to get really bad, and then the Antichrist is going to come, and then the end of the world's happening. So what do you do with this time period that seems like in between when the biblical canon ends and today? It seems really advanced. It seems like it might have been really good, whatever this time was, and it's just not written about. And then yeah, when you look into what the mainstream scholars talk about, how a lot of these buildings and cathedrals were built during the Dark Ages, you start to research the Dark Ages, and you're like,
Mm,
there's really not a lot of history about any of this stuff. It's
no.
there seems like there's lots of big holes and gaps in our history. And I think that's when I really started to have to like, okay, I need to figure out what this is, because whatever it is, it's important.
So what happened in, you said 2021 when you started to look at the Bible again or look more closely at it? What happened? Was it the pandemic, or did something happen to wake you up?
Well, it was so in 2020, obviously we have the pandemic, and then we
Mm,
have in America we had the election between Trump and Biden, and that was
mm,
really a lot of people are skeptical of the results, and I think I was starting to get just really disillusioned with this. Was before I made content, but I was aware of things on social media. I used to listen to a lot of news, and I was on Twitter a lot back then. Not really so much posting, but just reading
mm,
and just hearing all the news that are coming out around the world. And I really started to see how people would get during the pandemic. They would get blackballed and they would get banned, and they would say stuff that turned out later to be true, and they would still be ruined. And I just started to think, like, especially after the end of the year concluded with the election, and I was just thinking, like, I don't think anyone even cares what's true anymore. It doesn't even seem to matter.
no.
And then I had a personal crisis, and I'm not going to get too much into that, but it was just
Sure.
my whole world was just kind of like, I don't know what I can trust anymore. And so it was a real anxious time in my life, and it was a time where, yeah, I think God used that time to draw me closer to Him. And so I was like, okay, so I've been raised a Christian. I won't say
Yeah.
that I never had doubts, but I was a believer early on. But the more I kind of did have to decide, okay, what is true? What is truth? And then so okay, okay, I know that no matter what happens, that I believe in God, I believe in God's Son, and I believe what He did for me. So I grabbed the Bible and I just started reading it, and I was like, I need you, God, during this time. And I was praying for wisdom, and I was really trying to start over. And the more I did that, the more I was like, man, there's stuff in the Bible that I never knew was there. And
Yeah.
then, yeah, there's a lot of stuff. It was
Mm,
kind of the first conspiracies I was like going down, like biblical conspiracies, was about like the Nephilim and
yeah.
giants and weird stuff like that. It was just really interesting things that never got talked about in church. And so that's
Mm,
kind of was my focus at the beginning. And then after that, it was everything. And it was funny because I could kind of see the line between, things like fallen angels, demons, giants, and then the demons being the deceased Nephilim. And I thought, oh, this is all connected. Like, so maybe this is why things are the way they are. And I thought this is really important. And so I guess that's what I really started to look into about basically that what I really like to do then was to try to show people that, okay, so I don't really care what you guys believe, but I want to show you what the elites believe. And I think that's the kind of conspiracy stuff that really people are really into. If that I might not be able to prove to you that the devil's real, but I can prove to you, or I can show you a lot of evidence that the people who run this place, they believe he's real. And I can show you that through their
yeah.
actions and through all the code and all the
Mm,
symbolism and all the stuff that's in the culture. And I think that's really was that's kind of how I started out. And I thought that rabbit hole is kind of endless doing that.
What, what makes you, do you think that these people, these parasites, as I call them, that why do they follow that path? What do you think happens? Is this something from, is this something that goes back to the very beginning of their bloodlines, or is this something that has happened along the way? What do you think caused them to worship the devil?
Well, that's an interesting question. I've heard this, and this is I'm not, there's something I can obviously validate, but there was a Christian who came out of the Illuminati. This is from his own words. Again, I can confirm this. He was named Doc Marquis. You ever heard of him?
No, I haven't.
He
I'm
wrote
gonna have to. I'm gonna
I
have to
forgot what
look
the
now.
yeah, I forgot what the book he wrote. He passed away, I think, a couple years ago, but he he said that the people in the secret societies, that the reason they worshipped the devil, which they would call Lucifer,
Hmm.
and they, of course, they would not perceive him as the way that the Christian church would perceive Lucifer. They worshipped him because they believe he was the only God that was still here. Even you think about like the way that I think like Crowley, he talked about
Hmm.
how that there was this new age coming. And so we were leaving the age where like Christ was king, and
Yeah.
then the next age was going to be like the age of Horus. And I think that's kind of what they believe, is that there was this time where Christianity was kind of supreme, but then
Yeah.
there's this next age that was they were approaching, that it was their God who was going to have his turn. And I kind of thought, you know what, that's crazy, but it's kind of crazy like a fox, because
Mm.
it it makes sense in the way that as Christians we have to have faith in an invisible God. But I think that from their perspective, they must have some kind of tangible, I don't know, evidence, or
Yeah.
maybe through sight, or some kind of other
Mm.
means that this their God is real. He's not invisible to them. And and kind of just in the most superficial way, you'd say that these secret societies obviously hold back lots of information from everybody, including their own members of the societies. It's all through
Yes.
levels of understanding. So, but we do know that through that, the people who are in the club, they get things. Kind of like the very beginning of in the Gospels, is when the devil takes Jesus up to a high place and offers him all the kingdoms, all the things that he could ever desire in his flesh. And Jesus says no, but I believe that lots of people took that deal.
Yeah.
And it's like they have kind of the evidence that they have all the stuff. So I think that's kind of what it is. It's that there's in some of the non-canonical books, it does talk about how the devil he's kind of like the god of this material world.
Mm.
So if you want the things of this world, then that's who you go to ask him for them.
So they think that this is Lucifer. Who do you think they're talking about?
Well, I mean, the more I've kind of looked into things, I think that, for one, like Satan is kind of a generic term.
Mm.
It's a title. I do know that where they get the idea of Lucifer comes from Isaiah 14. But I think Lucifer is kind of like, maybe to draw a parallel would be like Apollo in Greek
Yes.
mythology. He's the sun god. He's the god of prophecy and light and knowledge and, lots of good things.
Mm,
And so, like, if you're seeking knowledge or gnosis, and again, that's what I think a lot of these secret societies basically are, they're just Gnostics.
mm,
And so they have this view of the God of the Bible being this evil God who trapped us in this material world, and we're all kind of divine beings being trapped in a physical realm. And so they believe in basically that first lie from the Garden of Eden, that you can become as gods. You can be like gods if you have this knowledge from this tree. So
yeah.
I think that lie still works on people, because I think inherently that people like us, we know that there's more to this place than we've been taught. And then so you have people who offer you that knowledge, and they have all the things in order to say they could validate what they say is true, because if that's what you're seeking, right? If you want to use knowledge to kind of get the world by its tail, well, then they can offer you that. And but I would say that it's kind of like that there's more than one Satan, I believe. You can, if you read in the book of Enoch, it talks about the Satans.
Mm,
So I do think that there's, it could be, again, like you have the devil, like the famous phrases about how he's got many names,
yes.
and he and
Yeah.
he comes in different forms. He can appear as an angel of light. So it's kind of like whatever you want him to be, that's who he'll be for you in order to, get you to do his bidding.
Yeah. It's funny. I was going to ask you about Napoleon Bonaparte, and the name's always fascinated me. But Nostradamus and Dolores Cannon, they said that he was an antichrist, and that there's another one coming now that will have been, I believe, raised in the Middle East, not living with their parents, perhaps orphaned, seem to be doing a lot of work to um, support those that need it, to really sort of, I suppose, resonate with the ordinary man on the street, and to fight our corner with us, and not to trust them because they were a false prophet. They're going to be seen as being this sort of savior, I suppose, in a certain way, a little bit like some people are seeing Donald Trump, that he's going
Hmm.
to fix all of these problems. But then at some point, the fear is, for me, with him in particular, is that the other shoe will drop, and people will see actually they've been lured in and it was a trap, and he's on the same team as everybody else. The world's a theatre and so on. But the reason that was going to mention Napoleon, I read somewhere recently that there's a statue in Russia. I think it's in Moscow, and it's of Napoleon, and it's called Neapollo.
Right. Yeah. You think about it, even, yeah, Napoleon, Apollyon
Hmm.
sounds very similar. Yeah. Apollyon is the being mentioned in Revelation chapter 9. He's the king of the bottomless pit, and he's the beast that the dragon gives his authority over to, that many people believe that's who your kind of antichrist is.
Mm,
Now, I think that from my perspective now, I've kind of, if I do believe that a lot of the stuff from the book of Revelation is past tense, what I really start to see is that even if you read, the only time the Antichrist is ever mentioned in the Bible is in First John, and First John just calls them antichrists. There's antichrist, and then there's an antichrist that's coming. And what the antichrist is basically anybody who denies that Jesus was sent by God to us. And so it's kind of funny in the same way that if we want to be literal about what the scripture says, because if that's our guide for what an antichrist is, even like somebody like Trump, he claims to be a Christian, so it's kind of weird that he would be the Antichrist, like, per se, because he literally doesn't fit the definition,
yeah.
because he doesn't deny Jesus. I was actually kind of thinking about that too when you were asked about Napoleon. I have no idea what his religious background was. Was he Catholic, or was he? I don't even know, like,
I
what.
don't know either. I've read a lot about him, and that's one thing that I've never seen mentioned anywhere. Now,
Yeah,
somebody
that's a good.
watching this will know the answer, I'm sure, but I've often questioned his existence.
Well,
Uh,
I saw somebody doing a presentation about how, and I think that I saw a clip, and he was I don't think that he was saying Napoleon didn't exist, but he was making a case that he didn't exist. And I think that's
Mm,
he was saying how easily you could manipulate history.
mm,
And so there is a lot of sketchy things about his background, about how he rose to power so quickly and
mm.
was such a dominant force. And yeah, in this kind of research that we do, that obviously he was lived there in a very sketchy time.
Yeah.
That we are questioning everything about the things we're told. So is it too much of a stretch to say that he wasn't necessarily who they said he was, or maybe they gave some men or multiple men his attributes in order to make this historical
Yes.
figure? I've long thought the same thing about some of our like the founding fathers of America, like stories about like George Washington. They're really weird if you actually really
Mm,
look into like the histories of these guys. Even like Abraham Lincoln, that his tomb was like moved like 5 or 6 times, and there was like these old pictures where it almost looks like they discovered his tomb. It's really weird stuff that men were like deified in this kind of way. And I think, yeah, because I am American, Napoleon's not as, I guess it's not on the front of my brain. So I'm
no,
seeing this, but
no, of
I do
course.
see the similar parallels where these people were like larger than life. And it's like, I'm not saying for sure they didn't exist, but it's more like, what if they existed longer ago than they we're told? You know,
Right.
they were
Yeah.
moved up into like very recently, but what it, because that's what I was saying, like that if you think about like the whole concept of like Tartaria or the old world, if we don't believe that some of these buildings in America were built in the same time period they say they were, well, what do you do with these historical men who are deified in these buildings? What if they're older too? You know,
Yes.
what if like Napoleon was like a Roman, you know, like a literal Roman soldier or emperor or something like that? Because I was even saying, we went to Raleigh, North Carolina. That's the capital of North Carolina. That's about 3.5 hours from me. And I went to their state capitol building. Of course, Greco-Roman, just
Yeah.
unbelievable building. And I walked into the place, and there's a statue, and I was like, "Who is that?" And it was this Roman guy. And then I looked closer, and I was like, "Wait a minute, that's George Washington." And yeah,
Oh,
there was an
really?
inscription. Yeah, and he was in full Roman garb, and I was like, that is really weird, especially when you find out like the dates supposedly when this was created. It was like not long after he died. Like, why would you ever depict some kind of colonial American guy looking like a Roman citizen? And there's multiple statues where he looks like Zeus. So I'm like, why?
Oh,
Like, why would they ever do that? Even like if you go to the Lincoln Memorial, you have a giant statue to Abraham Lincoln where he's sitting on a throne, like he looks like
yeah.
a giant, and he looks. It's kind of the same vibes as you see like the with those one of those wonders of the world where they used to have that ancient temple, I think in Greece, and Zeus was in there. That's what it looks like. I mean, I think,
It's funny, isn't it? Because I've looked into Lincoln, and several times people have sent me messages and information suggesting he was a giant. And but when you look into his backstory, he was incredibly tall for that alleged period of time. He was incredibly tall.
right. Hmm.
Um, and so I think they've addressed it delicately, subtly addressed the fact that he might be giant by stating that he was 6.5 feet tall or whatever they say. So I think sometimes maybe they think, oh, we're going to have to do something here. People are starting to talk about this, so let's just say he was tall for that
Yeah, he
period
was
of
tall. He
time.
was tall, and they used to tell us that everyone used to be short, so he was really
Mm,
tall. But you know what's
yeah.
funny that to go back to one thing you said was you were talking about how through bloodlines. That's
Mm,
one thing I definitely believe is that what I've read a few books about that kind of a thing, and what I saw was that like people like the Rothschilds, I think the Windsor family, I think the Bush family, they claim this like royal lineage going back to all the way back to like Nimrod and things
yeah.
like that. I want to say the Windsor family and the Bush family claim to be sons of Marduk. And so Marduk
Yes.
is the Babylonian name for Jupiter, Zeus. And then so you have that, yeah, I think that I want to say that the Rothschilds had connections where they dated themselves back to like a Sumerian ruler named Nimrod.
Yeah.
And so it kind of makes sense that based on that kind of research into the Nephilim, that Nephilim were the offspring of angels and humans. And but it makes sense. So you have this different kind of bloodline, like literally like different type of blood type that makes you have this, I guess, divine right to rule here.
Mm.
And that's why people talk about, even in America, even though we have elections, people say presidents aren't elected, they're selected. What's
Yes.
really interesting if you think
Yeah.
about it. So if you go back, you look this up, that yeah, we're often told that people in the past were shorter than we are now. Like the average height was smaller. Well, if you look at the average heights of the American presidents, I think the average height is 6 foot. Like they're like
Yeah.
it's not unusual for them. Like there's many of them that are over 6 foot. Like George Washington was over 6 foot. Abraham Lincoln was over 6 foot. Thomas Jefferson, I think, was like 6'4", 6'3". All these guys who were kind of like the big time founding fathers. And the one thing that was funny, that I was looking this up because we talked about Abraham Lincoln on a recent podcast, that I know when we were talking about Tesla the last time we had a conversation, you were talking about how you were skeptical he existed, and
Yeah.
one of the real reasons you thought that was because he's got no offspring.
Mm.
I learned that George Washington never had any kids.
Neither did Napoleon.
Yeah. Okay. So he had no kids. And I was thinking, like, that's a really unusual thing to, like, a guy
Mm.
like George Washington have no children. And then Abraham Lincoln, I want to say that he had 5 children. 5 or 4 of them died before the age of 16. And then
Wow.
yeah, and then so he's got no living offspring. Zero.
This is a common factor, isn't it? When you look
It's
into these
unusual. I mean,
people.
it would seem to be unusual.
Yeah. Einstein's the same. And of course, in theory, if we follow the mainstream narrative, then I don't even know if we're allowed to say his name on YouTube, but the Chancellor of Germany during the Second World War, no offspring, if we follow the narrative. I mean, some people say he did and suggest that it's key people within world politics, but I do find it interesting that there is nobody you can go up to an interview right now that can say, well, that's my great great granddad or my great uncle, or
Yeah.
that we're talking about, and look, here we are together in this photo, and here's our family tree, and here's some photo albums and records and letters and so on, and there's nothing. It's brilliant, isn't it? And like you said, people were apparently a lot shorter back then,
Hmm.
and also people didn't live as long. But when I spent a lot of time walking around churchyards, looking at graves and going to cemeteries, always looking for dates and signs of a J instead of a one.
Hmm.
Um, and I look at how old these people are, and it doesn't seem to be very different to right now. So I don't know
No.
where that comes from.
Yeah, there's a lot of sketchy things about the idea, that the people only live to be about 50 years old and things like that. But
Hmm.
it doesn't really seem like that when you actually look at historical figures. It's like yeah, I think that, what is it, Mark Twain, who said that lies and damn statistics, and they were talking about how that you could kind of use statistics to make it do whatever you want it to do,
Yeah.
because if you factor in the world wars and all the wars during these certain times, of course the average age might be lower, that when young men get sent
Yes.
off to war to die, but that's not necessarily how long that the expected life would be if you were not going to war.
That's a good way of describing a war. Young men being sent to die.
So, I mean, yeah, they're definitely sending the youngest men to go do that, 17,
Yeah.
18 years old. I mean, that's just
Yeah.
what we always were taught. I mean, as soon as, if they have a draft in the military, like the last one they had in America was, yeah, 18 years old, get sent off to
Yeah.
Vietnam.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a song, I don't know if it was popular or even if you heard of it over there, but it was by someone called Paul Hardcastle, and it was called 19, and it was about the Vietnam War.
No,
You'd
I
have to
haven't heard of that, but yeah, but it makes
Oh, you'll
sense.
have to see if you can find it. Paul Hardcastle, and it's
Okay.
19. Yeah, when I was in my teens, that was massive. And that led me at school in English to actually write an essay about the Vietnam War, focusing purely on the average age.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, uh, uh,
Mm-hmm.
but the First World War and Second World War were actually worse. You know, they were sending children out
Yeah.
there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. And the amount of loss of life in these wars was.
Mm,
I hate to say that I'm even questioning the numbers on those wars too. When you actually think about the amount of people they say died during those wars, it's
w-
almost like that. It's
it,
sort of unfathomable to really think about the amount of people they say died. And what was it, 60 something million people died in World War
yeah,
II?
it doesn't stack up. The interesting thing with World War II, from my perspective, is and incidentally, my granddad, he signed up when he was 14, lied about his age.
Oh wow, that was so my grandfather just passed, well actually about a year ago today, but he was buried in Arlington Cemetery, which is like the famous military cemetery right just outside of DC, and he fought in World War II, Korea and Vietnam. And yeah, he lied about his
Wow.
age to go fight in World War II.
It's incredible, isn't it, what they would do? I'm sorry to hear that you lost
Well,
him.
he was 99, so I mean he lived a pretty
Oh
full life.
man,
But
that's
yeah,
that's
but yeah,
impressive.
but yeah, that kind of mindset that you would volunteer
Mm,
to go do that is wild. I mean, it's obviously it's again that's why they call them the greatest generation. But of course, now when you get to do what we do, you kind of think like, man, they really took advantage of people that they use the propaganda and their own patriotism
mm.
in order to get people. Yeah, because I mean, of course, now you're looking back, you're like, man, what a waste a lot of that was.
Yeah, I mean, and look at what else they did. I mean, I saw something recently where some old footage where women were handing over their silk tights for parachutes, and of course we know what happened with the church bells. They were
Oh,
allegedly
yeah. Hmm.
melted down and then reappeared suddenly.
Well, not only that, I want to say in America, because they were, well, at least the narrative says, is they needed all these metals. They were melting down more than just bells. Then who knows what got involved in the things they were using to make bombs and bullets and tanks and ships
Mhm.
with.
One thing that's quite interesting that happened here is that really, when it comes to bombing that we suffered here in Britain, London took the brunt of it, the Blitz. But the weird thing about that is that there was a big area in East London that some quite wealthy and powerful people wanted to redevelop, but the residents wouldn't sell, they wouldn't budge. And that's the area that got flattened.
Oh my God.
Nowhere else, because you would think you would take out Westminster, you would take out St. Paul's, you would take out Buckingham
Hmm.
Palace, key places. You know, if you wanted to do to the British what the Allies did to the Germans in Dresden and places like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they state that you know, they really wanted to dent the morale of the people there, and that's
Hmm.
why they did what they did. That it was sort of to do with really crushing their morale. Well, Buckingham Palace would have been a brilliant place to have hit, but they didn't. They didn't hit
Right.
it. They hit
Yeah.
nothing of any significance. And
Yeah.
of
Well, that's
course,
interesting too. Oh, good. Finish what you're saying. Sorry.
sorry, and I was going to say that here in London, what they did was they evacuated everybody. The children were sent away. A lot of children were sent out to the countryside, um, to go and live with other families on farms and so on, well out of the way. So they
Hmm.
made sure that the children were going to be okay, and the adults were sent down into the London Underground, the underground train network, to be protected during the bombing. Now, I can't help wondering if that was so they didn't see what was happening.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so then the kids would not have any clue, so they would not be able to pass on the stories of actually what happened too. And so
Mm.
if the adults did never made it out, then yeah, it's funny. I was just watching with my kids a couple weeks ago, the Chronicles of Narnia.
Oh
Watch that
wow,
again.
yeah.
Yeah, so of course in that movie, that's what happens, right? That the
Mm.
kids get sent off into some kind of rich estate out
Yeah,
in the country because of the bombings in Britain.
yeah. Yeah, then that did happen. My dad was sent down here. We're in Devon in the southwest of England, and we are just a few miles away from where my dad grew up with his older brother for exactly that reason. They went to live with their auntie. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, because they were in Dover, in Kent, the White Cliffs of Dover. My step granddad, who raised my dad, he was a commander in the British Navy, and he was a Trinity House pilot. So he was someone that used to bring the larger ships into the port at Dover, so the warships and so on. And he was key in the evacuation, bringing the troops back from France back to England. That's what he was involved in. And so there was a lot going on in around South London, London and South London, Kent, that sort of area. There was a lot going on there, and so they moved a lot of the children away, and we've ended up living by accident just a few miles away from where he was sent during his evacuation.
Oh,
So it's
wow, that's
real,
interesting.
really strange series of events. And we used to have an art gallery in the same town that he was raised in, and it turned out after we'd had the place a couple of months that it used to belong to his grandfather.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a small world.
he was the inspector in the police here, and it was part of the police station. And our shop, our gallery, was his office, and our basement was where he used to keep his police horse and the hay and so on. And it just complete accident. And then we rented a house, and it was just a few doors down from where my dad lived.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's very strange. Sometimes I think all these things are connected, and they lead you to be exactly where you are supposed to be.
Yeah, I believe that. I mean, that's one thing that I think that a lot of people come to the conclusion when you do a lot of this research is there's no coincidences. There's something going
No.
on here, and I think our God has he has a plan. He has a certain order of the way he does things, and then also the enemy has a way to do things. So yeah, I don't think that these things are random, and I think that's the thing that we're taught about how disasters and wars and
Mm.
all the kinds of things are just random when I don't think that they are.
No, I totally agree. Who is to you God? If you had to describe God, because you've said a couple of times he, and I know we all kind of naturally do that, but do you think it actually is a being, or do you think it's more of an energy?
I believe that. I mean, I believe the biblical narrative on how what God is described as is he's, God's described the God the Father would be like an all-consuming fire. He's kind of, I think he has kind of a somewhat of the appearance of a man, but then you have Jesus who does appear to be a man. It talks about in Daniel, like the Ancient of Days. He's got like half of him looks like fire. I think that's what he's is described in Ezekiel too. But he kind of like the upper half kind of looks like a man, and then you have the Son of Man who would be that was the pre-incarnated Christ in Daniel, and then so when Jesus came to Earth, he took on a mortal body. And then when he was resurrected, he still appears somewhat like a man, but he obviously is clearly different. If you read the book of Revelation,
Mm.
he's got like flames in his face and shines like lightning or the sun on noonday. And yeah, so I mean, I think that it also makes sense that God, we're made in the image of God, it's like he did make us like him in some respects. But yeah, I mean, God the Father is it's it's really hard to kind of like quantify something that is beyond our comprehension on like what
Yeah.
exactly he is or what he's like or what he appears to be like. Because I don't know, it's kind of funny. I've been reading a lot of the Tolkien stuff and I've been trying to like read through the mythos of that kind of stuff. And I thought that was a kind of a and I know that's not necessarily like biblically accurate in all of it, but there's so many parallels that seem like I wonder if it was kind of like this that there was this time where it was almost like it was almost like just a void, and then I think in the Tolkien mythologies on the creation of everything, it was sang there was a song that kind of sang everything, and then later it was made materially, but there was a song made by the creator and then the lesser gods that he created. They sang all that we can see into existence,
Mm.
and then later that some of the lesser gods took forms inside that existence. And I was thinking, like, I bet you that seems like it kind of makes sense. It kind of makes sense
Yeah.
to me. I don't know what I can't really put my finger on it. I guess it's not necessarily biblical, but I don't think that it contradicts the Bible either. Because I think that there's one creator that created everything, or one who created the lesser gods, and I think he used the lesser gods as part of the creation, and that kind of makes sense. It kind of makes sense in the sense that when I've done a lot of research into kind of like the pagan mythologies and
Yeah.
the pantheons of gods, they all had these gods who had these certain kinds of duties, or they
Yes.
were in charge of certain things, like
Yeah.
the sun. And like you think even like Apollo had the chariot and he was bringing the sun across. You had Helios before him, and then you have other gods that are, other celestials, and then you have like a Neptune who's the god of the sea, and
Mhm.
and that's the kind of same thing in like the Tolkien mythos. It kind of makes sense that God is a God of order. So if he created these other beings, he gave him things to do, just like he gave Adam something to do when he put him in a garden. So it makes sense. And so if those lesser gods were able to be interacted with in the material world,
Mhm.
when you had in the Tolkien, I guess is Eru Luvatar, he was like the creator, and he was not the beings that the other beings he created, like the elves and the men, they never probably had access to him, but they would have more likely to have access with the other created lesser gods.
Yeah.
And so you could kind of see if that's sort of how it was like here, that's how you could get the idea of like that people start worshiping other gods or a multitude of gods
Yeah.
instead of the one who created them all.
Yeah. It's a kind of like a hierarchy.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that that makes the most sense to me, is that even like in the stories in Enoch, you had the Watchers, and they
Yes.
really weren't supposed to interfere with humanity. They were supposed to be, I don't know. They obviously they had some kind of jobs which they don't. It's not really clear what they were supposed to do, but whatever they did, they kind of valued what humanity had, and they basically tried to live like them or tried to rule over humanity, and then that's obviously why they got judged for it later.
Yeah.
But God put them here for a reason, I believe, and it was ultimately to steward people along to Him, but that those false gods would accept worship when it was not them to be worshipped.
Yeah. You mentioned Nimrod earlier on,
Hmm.
and a lot of people will say that Nimrod and Gilgamesh are the same person.
Hmm.
Where are you
Yeah.
on that?
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with
Mm.
that. I think that there's another historical figure named Sargon of Akkad, and he was credited to be like the first kind of god king emperor.
Mm.
And so like Gilgamesh would be, well, I mean, to historians, he would just be a mythology,
Yeah.
never existed. But the Sargon of Akkad had kind of a similar lineage of what is kind of mentioned about people like Gilgamesh. So Gilgamesh would have been, he was a 17-foot tall giant,
Yes.
and so he would have been a biblical Nephilim. And
Yeah.
so he would have had probably a offspring of an angel, and I want to say in the mythology of Gilgamesh, I want to say that he was like three quarters god. He was so he had a fully god father, and I think his mom might have been half, so she would have been like a hybrid. And so it's kind of interesting. I think that that's like in the story of Sargon of Akkad. I think that they said he had no father, and then his mom was a changeling.
Right.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I find it interesting in the stories of like kind of the Sumerian mythologies. You have like,
Hmm.
I want to say that Nimrod. It's weird because like his mom and his wife are like the same.
Yes.
Yeah, like it could be either Semiramis or Inanna, and so like that's would be another name for like Ishtar or
Yes.
Ashtoreth, right? And
Yeah.
then you have his son Tammuz. So it's kind of like you kind of have like this very common theme, I think, post deluge. You have this kind of triune, I call it like an unholy trinity, where you have like a sky father, and then you have like a divine female, and then you have a son. So in Nimrod, it would be like Semiramis, Nimrod, and Tammuz. And then so if we're talking from the Egyptian perspective, it would be like Isis, Horus, and Osiris. But you still have this three. Even like in the, I think the Greek mythology, you would have had like maybe Zeus, Leto, and Apollo.
Yeah.
So that was the one thing I learned kind of early on researching, that I didn't realize that Apollo was not fully God. He was partially human. And at one point, I think he got stuck on the earth. He did something. He sinned against Zeus, and he was stuck. He had to live as a man for a while. And I thought that's really interesting, because I think that's that story being repeated over and over again. And I think it sort of makes sense, is that during this Tower of Babel situation, you have like this one head giant, this one Nephilim. This is Nimrod, and
Yeah.
he's once again, they're in rebellion against God, and through him probably came all these other kings, which I would have believed that, like in the biblical story, you have the land of Canaan is full of all these giant kings
Mm.
when they go into the promised land and they have to purge out these giants. It mentions, I think, in the stories of like Sargon of Akkad and Nimrod, that he set up all these cities that are kind of in that area. And it makes sense that how kings typically would control places, it would be like through marriage and through their children.
Yeah.
So I think it makes sense. I think, to me, from my perspective, or at least my interpretation of it, is that before the flood, there was probably lots of really big giants, because there was probably lots of different offspring of different angels.
Yeah.
But I think after the flood, it was more limited. Might have been limited to one. And I thought, in my perspective, I thought, kind of makes sense that, what if Nimrod was like a direct descendant of like the devil?
Oh,
Because
wow.
that
Okay.
was that's my thought, is just because that the original Watchers were put in Tartarus, put in the
Mm.
bottomless pit, and
Mhm.
waiting judgment. And the devil is obviously out. Or he was out afterwards to do whatever he wanted to. And I thought that many people have the theory that when God gives the original prophecy about how Eve's seed is going to crush the head of the serpent, then at that point, the fallen, the other angels, they knew the plan was that there was this bloodline that was going to come through to ultimately defeat them.
Mm.
So I think that the plan might have been to corrupt man's bloodlines. And then after that, God obviously wipes the slate clean after the flood, but then giants still pop up afterwards. So I thought
Yeah.
maybe it makes sense that there was a second incursion, but maybe it was really limited. Maybe it was just limited to one.
Yeah.
And that's why after the fact, you think like that, the in the Greek and Roman mythologies, there's this old pantheon of gods, and they believe the same thing. Those gods are in Tartarus. Those
Yeah.
those ones have been put away, and then after that, you have the new head of the god pantheon, which is Zeus. And so he did, in those mythologies, Zeus fathered children on Earth. So I don't know. I could be wrong about that, but it kind of makes sense to me that you have that if Zeus, biblically, you can make a pretty good case that he's called the devil in the book of Revelation, because it talks about Pergamum had a place called, there was an altar to Zeus there, and it looks like a throne. And Jesus tells Pergamum he knows where the place that they're at is where Satan's throne is, and it's on a temple to Zeus. And then again, of course, you have later Apollyon is the one who the devil gives his authority over to. So I thought that maybe it would make sense that if that Apollo was maybe a reincarnation, or maybe he was the spirit of Nimrod, then maybe that would make sense. But it's all speculation.
Well, it's funny that because we were talking earlier on, weren't we, about Napoleon? And just then, all I heard you say that was Napoleon again. Um, I,
Mm-hmm.
it's now stuck in my head. Napoleon is not what we've been led to believe, and we did this, as you said earlier on. We covered this about Tesla. That I don't, that I don't think is real. And Napoleon is just this. It won't leave my mind. I keep thinking about it over and over again. That a lot of these figures have been just created, and they've had such a fantastic play on words, or it's not what we've been told at all. This is a form of antichrist.
Yeah, well, it makes sense in the way that too that I know that they have this ritual, at least I'm told, in Washington D.C. Every time a president's inaugurated, they have this ceremony at the
mm,
Scottish Rite Freemasonry building there. They do this ritual to Osiris. It's like some kind of Osiris Risen thing, and it was like that the American president is like taking on the spirit of Osiris, which makes sense because you have like the Washington Monument is a giant obelisk.
yeah,
So I mean that's a symbol of Osiris for sure. And then yeah, then there's these different all these different depictions of these American presidents postured like Zeus. And I think that I mean I don't think that's an accident. So I don't know that how accurate any of that is. I don't know how if those people
mm,
are literally related to him, but it does seem like that's what they believe.
yeah,
And it is a spirit of Antichrist the way that they're depicted for sure, because you have like this different, because Osiris kind of has a resurrection mythology too,
yes,
but it's it's obviously not like Jesus' resurrection, but yeah, like so Osiris, that's who he is. So it is kind of yeah, it's definitely got Antichrist vibes for sure. So I would be willing to bet if you did dig deeper into Napoleon, you might find similar accounts about the way he's portrayed or the way that he's memorialized in things.
yeah.
And of course he did. Of course he always did do
Yes,
the hidden hand thing. So
yeah. It's something that I wrote about briefly, and I've mentioned a few times, but it's something I'm currently digging into a little bit more. I've just got a fixation recently on Napoleon again, and this was a year ago that I was looking into him, and then I left it, and I'm back there. There's something that's not quite right, but I'm going to keep digging, and you've actually helped me, so I appreciate that.
well,
You mentioned, sorry,
no, I was gonna say, what's interesting about Napoleon though too is that wasn't it that there's a real famous account about how that when Napoleon, I guess they were conquering northern Africa, that he, came across the pyramids.
yes,
And I remember hearing this story, and of course, I'm not sure how accurate it is, but you can look this up. Is that in the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid, there's this thing that almost looks like a coffin, and they said that Napoleon spent the night in there,
mm,
slept in the coffin, and it was, like at least symbolically, it was some kind of Osiris thing. I think it was like a resurrection type thing. And then, of course, if you think about it, in some of the other Freemasonry rituals, they do have to go get down in a coffin themselves.
yeah. I kind of when you the third degree is symbolic of being in a coffin. You are, isn't it?
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. That's weird because it they turn all the lights out, and so for you it is dark, and that they're talking about you
Hmm.
like you've gone, and
Hmm.
it is strange, and I think that that's where the expression comes from, that a lot of people probably will resonate with. It's don't give them the third degree. If you're really giving someone a hard time, don't give them the third degree.
Oh, I never even made that connection, but yeah, that makes sense. Give
Yeah,
me the third degree. Hmm.
it's yeah. For me, that was a strange evening. That really was. It wasn't at all what I was expecting. You mentioned earlier on Marduk, and I've been following Billy Carson. Well, I recently stopped following Billy Carson, but he's often said that Marduk is Amun Ra. They are one and the same people, and that Amun Ra left everything, the power, and control, and all of everything on Earth to the children of Ra, the Ra childs.
Hmm.
Have you ever heard that?
No, I haven't, but I mean, at the same time, it doesn't surprise me that I think that one thing that seems to be really obvious once you start to research this is that all these different kingdoms or empires in that same Mesopotamian region that they all understood that their pantheon of gods was the same pantheon of gods.
Mm,
Because even like you think about the story going all the way back to Atlantis, is when what Solon is told the story from the Egyptians about the story of Atlantis. He passes it off to Herodotus, and then Plato gives the famous account about the mythologies of Atlantis. So in that story, Plato says that Poseidon founded Atlantis. Well, we know that that wouldn't have been the name that the Egyptians would have called him,
Yeah.
but in some way, he obviously knew that if this was some god of water, some god of the sea, it's the same god. And there's another story. I think when they said Alexander the Great was trying to conquer, um, I think the Phoenicians, and he wanted to worship at the temple of Melkart. And I think that they had an island city, and then they had a city that was kind of on the land side.
Mm.
And the Phoenicians would not let him go worship in the island city. And there's this famous story about how Alexander the Great was furious and he staged this massive siege that I guess the Phoenicians didn't think he could take this place, and he did. But then I was like, well, why would he want to worship their god? Because he viewed Melkart as Hercules. So yeah, so if the Egyptians called Marduk Amun Ra, that wouldn't surprise me at all because it's, they would have had a name for whoever the Babylonians' name is for that same god.
It's sort of, to me, it held water when I first heard Billy Carson talking about this, because you could see, um, you know, these bloodline families, and the Rothschilds perhaps being one of the better known ones, that would sort of stack up. It connected a few dots for me, that seeing these Ra childs, the children of Ra, and then he leaves
Oh yeah,
everything
yeah.
to it, and it just, for me, it was a massive help understanding why these certain families truly believe that they have this right to control us, or they have this ultimate power, that they have this birthright, and that is to own and control everything. It's all theirs. It just seems inbuilt, and the Rothschilds were perhaps the best example of that. Uh, Sorry.
No, I was gonna say yeah. That I mean, I think that that was a thing that when you learn in school, when you hear about certain these rulers of these places claiming to be divine,
Mm,
you start to like when you don't look into this or you never heard anything like this, you would just assume it was a very arrogant man, right?
yes.
A delusional, arrogant man was claiming
Mm,
to be a god. And I think that when you look in through like the Roman emperors, many of them were deified after they were dead.
yeah.
But then later, like during the biblical times, these guys actually did claim to be like reincarnated Apollo. Like emperors like Nero and Domitian, they actually claim to be like godlike.
Yeah.
And so in the Egyptians, yeah, that you often hear that same kind of story is that these Egyptians claim to be god kings. And it makes sense that why they would think that and why they were able to rule and why that they would like why couldn't any man be the king of Egypt or the ruler of
Mm,
Egypt? It makes sense that he was able to trace his bloodlines back to a god king, like a literal god king,
yeah.
and an angel.
Yeah. Do you think that there is something ultimately that they report to? I know we said earlier on that, that they're, I suppose, Satanists, aren't they? But do you think that there actually is something that they physically see, a being, or a person, or something that can perhaps shapeshift?
That's one of the topics I've been really kind of really been talking about a lot over the past month or so. I was watching it. I was getting into the Tolkien mythos, and I was watching that show, The Rings of Power. And so in that show, it's if you guys are not familiar, it's the backstory to, I think it comes from like the Silmarillion, and it's some letters from Tolkien he wrote, and this is kind of like leading up to like the Lord of the Rings or the Hobbit and
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings and all that stuff. So Sauron is a lesser god, kind of an evil god, but he's like a lesser one. There was a greater god named Morgoth, but Sauron is the kind of the new Dark Lord after Morgoth is put in a pit. He's put in a pit for eternity. And when he tries to rule through deception. And I thought it was really interesting the way that the series starts out. They show that he his earthly body, like his fair form, is killed, and then he turns into this black goo, and
Oh
then
wow.
the
Okay.
black goo starts to eventually, like, it consumes like these insects, then it consumes some kind of animal, and then eventually it comes across a person, and then it possesses this person, and all of a sudden the person looks different when he's takes this person's form. And I really started to get thinking about that, like that you should have movies like, The Devil's Advocate.
Yeah.
You think it like there's that very popular show, Lucifer. And I was thinking, like, what if, is it possible that that is like, are they really showing us what that would really be like? Is that he is taking these different forms and he really is interacting as a man would, and not everyone would know who he really was, and he would be somebody. Maybe he would be somebody not like on the level of like a prime minister or like a
Yeah.
president. He'd be more subtle than that. He'd be kind of like the smart mob boss who really doesn't want to be photographed. He would be kind of
Yes.
behind the
Absolutely.
scenes. And of course, through like the ideas of the secret societies, that he wouldn't need to, they wouldn't all need to see him. He would only need to be giving out orders to certain people. I think that that could be valid. I think that it sort of makes sense that, from my perspective, again, that as a Christian, I have to walk in faith, and I have to let God's Holy Spirit move me and tell me what to do. And it's difficult sometimes because we don't have somebody telling us directly what to do all the time. It makes sense to me that if we walk by faith and not by sight, then they likely do the opposite. So maybe they are told, maybe they do see,
Mm.
and they do have real access. The other idea is that they could also be used through like demonic presences and things like that. So he could, the devil being a spirit, like the angels being spirit, they can be physical and spirit, so that they could possess men, or they could just, yeah, through other demons, they could get them to do what they want them to do too. So it's a good. I mean, it's a really fascinating question. It just seems like that idea makes sense to me.
I found it really strange when that series came out on Netflix. That why would Netflix actually have a show on there called Lucifer? What is this obsession with Hollywood and the media putting information out there to kind of almost force everybody to consider this? Because for me, it was just trying to make the whole that from what I've read and what I understand, Lucifer was supposed to be an incredibly beautiful person to look at, and I've read that several times over the years that people would sort of bathe in his glory and his beauty and so on. And then you see the TV series. I mean, we're not talking about something that looks horrific here. It's like it's in plain sight again to me. What do
Well,
you?
they're definitely trying to. I mean, the very least, they're trying to humanize him, and they're trying to make him
Mm,
sympathetic. That he's not all bad. Even like so in the Lord of the Rings, like Sauron is pure evil, but
mm,
he's kind of like, he has a reason why he's doing it. I think that they were showing like the Dark Lord Morgoth before him. He was just awful, but Sauron kind of wanted to have an order of things. He wanted to be the ruler of this place, but he had a reason, he had a plan, he thought he could make this place better.
mm.
So it's almost like that kind of same kind of idea, is that if you view the God of the Bible as the enemy, then this other being is sympathetic because he rebelled against this God that you don't think is good. And so that maybe that's why. Yeah, and of course, yeah, biblically, if you go to read Ezekiel 28, it says that this cherub was God's most beautiful creation.
Mm.
So he's got a lot of things that people would find alluring about him.
Yes,
But yeah, certainly that when they put it in the culture like that, I think that's what it really is. I mean, you think about like that song by the Rolling Stones, "Sympathy for the Devil,"
yes, yeah,
like that. You think that, and I think where a lot of that stuff comes from is like that book Paradise Lost, and I think that he's also viewed in a little bit of more sympathetic light there, and that's where he's given the full name Lucifer. I think Lucifer is not really his name. I think that's a title again that's mentioned in Isaiah 14. So what his real name is, we really don't know. The Bible really doesn't say. But yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting though in that movie, it kind of relates back to like almost the old world stuff. Is in Devil's Advocate, there's this speech where he's revealed through to Keanu Reeves' character,
Yeah.
and he starts talking about how could you deny that the 20th century has been mine, all of it, and then he's talking about how he's peaking in this century, and I thought, you know what, that's really interesting because that almost made sense, like in the way that some of us who believe that we could be in the little season, we do pinpoint the date right around 1776. What if this is when the devil was released from the pit and he was let out to deceive? And then
Mm.
so you kind of just think about like that again, almost in the Lord of the Rings kind of narration. They're saying that there's whispers of a shadow. There's this evil that's kind of like it's kind of nameless. People don't really know, but they know something's changed. There's like this shift. It's like a spirit just got let out. And meanwhile, this spirit is getting stronger and he's kind of gathering his army for
Yeah.
whatever he's trying to do. So then the history we're taught about like the 19th century, it's just chaos and it's hard
Mm.
to even know what's true. And so when he says that the 20th century was all his, it almost made me think it made me think that what if that's the century where he was really like putting in all the work
Yeah.
for whatever was going to be next. And so that's the century that kind of separated us from our true history. And so by the 20th century, all the lies of that previous century have started to take root. And now they're taught
Yes.
in schools and people believe it all. And that's why he says this century is all mine because people believe the last century was accurate or whatever our true history is covered up. So you only really know what he wants you to know now. And then he says he's peaking. And I thought, okay, that tracks. That tracks with everything we're talking about.
If he's peaking, that's definitely a good thing because that would suggest that it's on a decline now.
Well, if the devil, well, I mean, he's saying he's peaking. Well, I mean, I think that
If,
it does feel like that a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, I mean, I don't put any timelines on anything, but it does feel like that things are coming to a head a little bit.
mm,
I mean, I don't know how long it could go on like this, but it does feel like that there's so much more knowledge about all the things we're talking about. Even we are saying like the concept of the millennial reign of Christ and Tartaria and stuff like that. It's really picking up steam. We just started talking about this about a year and a half ago, like all, pretty regularly. And the more people are like, I saw people on X and stuff, and they're retweeting some of our videos and stuff we're talking about. And it's really surprising to see how many people are like retweeting it and saying, yeah, this makes sense. This makes sense. So at some point, it does feel like that whatever their goal was through this deception, it does have to have some kind of reason for where it's going next. And then during all this time, while the people are waking up, I mean, yeah, there's someone's got to give.
yeah, yeah. I think there's only so much people will tolerate, and even those that will never wake up, they'd certainly question. I would like to think they would question another pandemic, and I can see one of those coming. I don't know if you're aware, but we had a bill passed in Parliament here back end of May that gave the World Health Organization full control in the event of a pandemic, but it has to sit for a year. It can't be actioned for a year. So I
Mm.
figured that after May next year, and my guess is possibly around the 4th of July,
Oh
there
gosh,
something else will happen, and it will be interesting because a lot of people woke up in 2020. A lot of people that were on the fence,
for sure.
you know,
Hmm.
you saw it too. A lot of people just started to question things a lot more, and we had a lot of time on our hands. We were not able to socialize, so people were on BitChute and YouTube and absorbing more and more information, and then questioning more and more narratives. And as you said earlier on, one thing leads to another, doesn't it? You go down one rabbit hole and it leads to another and to another and to another, and then everything is on the table, and you start to look at, Antarctica, the moon landings, and
Yeah,
so,
everything.
and then
Yeah.
once I'm sure you're exactly where I am. Look, once you go down there, you can't come out.
No, you're never the same after doing this. I guess that's the thing I always want to stress is like that's why I say I believe in lots of the conspiracies. I do believe the Bible's true. I feel like you gotta kind of need to be rooted to some kind of truth. Otherwise you will just be kind of rudderless in
Yeah.
this kind of wasteland of all these lies and things like that. But it is interesting to think that when I first started making videos, I was talking about things like the mark of the beast coming, and
Mm.
because it does seem like that there's evidence that something like that could take place. But then I remember when I used to make those videos, some people would often say, "Hey, what about doesn't the enemy kind of have the playbook too? So don't they kind of already know like what's supposed to happen? So what if they were trying to maybe manifest some of these things like by their own volition
Yeah.
and or to make you think it was coming or and I kind of had to say, yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of true, but I mean, if God says it's going to happen, it's going to happen. No, I think most of that stuff happened. I believe that there was a mark of the beast back in the first century, but I just saw a video today before I came on with you. They were again pushing this idea of these electronic tattoos that had to do with like health passports and things like that.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, I don't think that's the mark of the beast, but I mean, like that is really scary stuff that people would give. I mean, the amount of control you would give your governments if you let them put something like that on you, that would eventually, I think, turn into things like social credit scores
Yes.
and maybe how you buy and sell and do all that kind of stuff is like, yeah, you really are. You're giving them so much control. I mean, I don't even people realize how much control that would be. Like they could limit you in every kind of way they could, the way society is now if people were on board with that. Now, I think as you said, a lot of people woke up and just because I think the mark of the beast has happened already, I would never get something like that. Never. And I think that a lot of people,
Yeah.
whether they're on my side of the street as far as like kind of biblical eschatology or not, I think we would all resist that. And I would hope that people after the last one would say, no, no, we're not doing this. And if we say no, what will happen after that?
See, getting a tattoo on you, and obviously, you've got some ink. I used to be a tattooist, so
Yeah.
I've got some. What do they call it? I've got something in the game. I can't remember what you call it over
Some
there.
skin
There's
in the game.
some skin in the game. That's it. So it's, but for me, whenever I hear that, and I've heard it several times, I think of barcoding in the Second World War.
Hmm.
That the Jews were being tattooed by IBM. Um, and
Yeah,
and
it seems real problematic that they'd be putting that kind of stuff. I mean, like, yeah, because that does kind of make you think of that kind of image. I was thinking that same thing too. Is that yeah, I'm not getting marked on my body by my government. No way, no how.
but there'll be some people that I can just see the same people that were posting saying, "Look at me, I'm doing my bit. I've just had my eighth booster." I can just see there will be some people out there that will think it's fantastic to go and get this done.
For sure. Yeah, no, I mean, there's no question that there's a certain amount of people that would do it, and I have no idea why.
No, me
It's kind of
neither.
it's kind of crazy when you think about that. When I used to be kind of really involved in that left right paradigm, as far as like yeah, conservative,
Mm,
liberal, progressive, that kind of a thing. And I mean, I'm still obviously I'm probably more conservative as far as my values go than I was then, but I understand that giving any politician, whether again, like, so if I'm more conservative, then yeah, I would prefer Trump to Kamala Harris or Joe
yeah,
Biden.
yeah,
But
absolutely, yeah.
but I would never want to give him enough power and authority to do things that violated my privacy and my rights. Now I've learned enough about. I mean, it's kind of like how can anyone be so naive, no matter what politician got in there, that you would give them more power than they've already got.
Yeah.
That to me is insane. Is insane because we do know that, I mean, pretty much history is a pretty good teacher on this, is that whatever powers the government takes, they never willingly give them back
No.
afterwards. Never. So it's only
No.
going to get worse. So the noose is only going to get tighter the more we let them do that.
Mm. Yeah, I think you're right. Where are you with Trump's son, Barron? What do you
Oh,
think's going on there? Because
that
that's
he's a
an
time
anomaly.
that he's a time traveler. Did you
Well,
hear?
there's something I just find him strange because I remember seeing him when he was a
He's
kid.
another giant, right?
He is, isn't he?
He's
And
big.
where's the Russian accent gone? I mean, he very confident as well. There's just something strange there, and I just wonder what your take was on it.
Well, I mean, I think I heard that book. There's that book that talks about there's a baron, and
Mm,
I'm kind of foggy on all the details. I mean, I definitely feel like that Trump is part of the club for sure. He would never be where he was. He would never have had the access to even run kind of independently if he wasn't in the club.
mm,
Now, I know that I also believe that some of the stuff could be theater with them, the fighting back and forth between the other
yeah,
side. I think some of it's legitimate. I think people legitimately don't like him, which is not hard to believe. But it does seem like that Trump has, for one, if you ever seen like I want to say his penthouse at Trump Tower, it's all decked out with all kinds of like Apollo type
is it
imagery. And oh, yeah. Hmm.
right? Okay,
Yeah. So it makes sense again that if you look into like the bloodlines, that there was this little girl who did a report at her school, and I remember it was kind of famously on the news, and she was connecting that all the presidents except for Martin Van Buren, American presidents, they were all related. They were all related to a king in England named John Laughlin. He was, I guess he was the king in the 12th, in the maybe the 13th century, who was there when they made the Magna Carta.
and they're all related. I've seen
Yeah,
some.
they're all related. And she said that Martin Van Buren was not related, but then somebody later said that no, that it turned out that he was related on the mother side. Well, it makes sense that there's not going to be just one off on there. So that, and I believe Trump's related to them too by some kind of cousin of all of them. Even Obama. So obviously, again, he doesn't look like the other American presidents, but he was still related to all of them.
It doesn't
Now,
surprise me.
yeah. So I mean, so if you think about it in that kind of context, that yeah, there's something going on with all their families. So could there be something with Trump's son coming later? I mean, it doesn't put it. I mean, again, I'm saying that I don't really know what all it means, but I do believe that these people do believe in the bloodline. So why wouldn't he play in some way? I
But
mean, it
he's
is unusual
mentioned
how tall he is, though.
it is,
He's
isn't it?
looking like a giant.
I I just thought at the time when I discovered Ingersoll Lockwood's books that it was you said earlier on about coincidences. There are no coincidences, and I agree. And what's really strange with these books that Ingersoll Lockwood wrote, with the Adventures of Baron Trump, and the Last President, about this man who's it's a very surprising choice for a president, is elected during chaos. He's from New York, and against all odds, he becomes the president. But he is the last president. Everything changes during his office, and then it's sort of passed down from that point. And I just see him and Barron and thinking, is Trump going to hang on there as long as he can, and he's just going to stay in office for years and years and years, because the man just seems to keep bloody going without even sleeping, doesn't he? And then does he just hand the baton down? Does it become, you know, this bloodline thing for the president? Does he become a king?
Well, I mean, that's the kind of thing that, I mean, so we do know how you get like these kind of totalitarian governments
Mm,
happen. There's an emergency, right? And so during
hmm
this time, there's no time for elections, or they have an election, but it's, or it's obviously rigged.
mm,
Now, the thing about Trump, though, he doesn't have that much support. So, yeah, I mean, they try to act like he's going to do that anyways all the time. Like, that's what they've always. They even tried to say that what January 6th was about. That was him trying to stage some kind of coup or whatever. Now, I guess this is the thing. Without knowing what kind of event could make that possible. I mean, even think about like during the World War II. I mean, FDR was president for like but 3 or 4 terms or something like that, and that's obviously not
Yeah,
something that you could do anymore. So during war times, yeah, that there's the potential that well, we've seen this in specifically in the pandemic that when they declare emergencies, our Constitution means nothing to
yeah.
them anymore,
Mm.
and it's kind of which I thought was really troubling. I think that was another kind of I don't know, black pill or red pill was I was like, okay, so if the Constitution doesn't mean what it says during an emergency, then it really doesn't mean anything
No,
because the people who get to declare the emergency are the ones who get the power. So maybe the Supreme Court should challenge that, but they didn't. And I thought that's when I was like, okay, yeah, we the 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 foundation of this society that we think is based on a democratic republic is really not what they
no,
say it is.
no, not
And
at all.
yeah, I mean it really does kind of come down to like yeah, what the government can do, they will do. And if people like Trump eventually if they I mean if they had the other side wanting that, well then it would be very difficult for that to not happen, I think, because I don't really view that our laws are really all that important to these people. so
No.
so could that happen? But yeah, so what was the story again? So I remember hearing that, but I didn't hear all the details. So when were those books written and what exactly did it say? It was saying that
Yeah. It's really strange because they were written over 100 years ago. I can't remember the exact date. My wife's got them, and what I found strange is that they weren't popular. Ingersoll Lockwood, the author, he was a lawyer, and he wrote these books. Hardly anyone bought them, and then as soon as Trump ran for office the first time, they suddenly appeared from nowhere, and everybody started talking about them and reading them,
that's
or at
really
least
weird.
yeah, and
Kind of suspicious, honestly.
it is, isn't it? And the first book, The Adventures of Baron Trump, um, the this lad, he comes from Castle Trump. Now I'm pretty sure Trump Towers was called, or at least or the casino was called Castle Trump originally, and they changed the name. And Baron Trump's advisor, his mentor in the story, is Don. And I
Mm.
thought, well, that's kind of weird. And then we have the last president. But what I thought was a possibility, and this is just how my brain works sometimes, is that what if these books weren't written 100 years ago?
Yeah. Hmm.
What if they were just made? We make out that they're that old, but actually they came out when Trump ran for office for the first time as some sort of marketing ploy, a little bit like when he was shot in the ear. And
Hmm.
I remember watching that, thinking, "Wow, whoever he paid to do that is incredibly skilled because they'd only have to be, a few millimeters out here or there, and they could have really done him some damage. If anything actually happened to his ear at all, he could have had something
Hmm.
behind it that exploded or splattered, red dye or whatever. I don't know, but my initial reaction when I saw that was that was done to boost his PR, his credibility, and gain support.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of that's what I was thinking too, that if nobody really knew about these books before recently, it sounds like that how would we know if they're that old? It's kind of
Mm,
like everything else that we question everything that they say that this building was built this certain year, but we're like, but how would we really know that? I mean, we have
yeah,
to trust you that that's true. So if this book wasn't known first, yeah, that's really strange. I mean, I guess it could be possible too that if those books were real, Trump was aware of them and he named his kid Barron because of that. I think
yes,
it could have been a self-fulfilling prophecy of something
yes.
like that. So that's yeah. Wasn't there another book too? What was it?
There's
Did
the
it was something
underground.
about?
Yeah.
I was gonna
Oh,
say,
sorry.
wasn't there? I was gonna say, wasn't there one that involved like Werner von Braun
Ah,
and and it was
Yeah.
something about this man. Forget the relation to
Elon.
he what. Yeah, it was this man who was going to go to Mars, and his name was
Mm,
Elon.
mm.
Was it Ron Braun who wrote the
It
book?
was. About Elon who establishes civilization. Yeah, he colonizes Mars.
Yeah.
You couldn't make it up, could you?
Well, actually, maybe you could. I guess that's the thing. It's like you could make it up. That's why it just, yeah. I mean, that's a lot of weird coincidences with these books with these very prominent people at the exact same time.
I
That
think so.
Elon being into SpaceX, then you have Barron Trump like literally in the White House right now. That's
Mm.
sort of weird.
Where are people with Elon, with Musk? I mean, I have a very unpleasant feeling about him.
I think that. Well, I mean, I guess it depends who you talk to. I think that from my perspective is that for one, he out of all the billionaires, I guess he's probably the least offensive one. I mean, he's like I don't really like him, but the bar is pretty low if you compare him to like Bezos and Gates and some of these other
Yeah,
guys. He's
yeah,
like,
fair
we
enough.
like him better than him because
Gates, my God.
he's he's sort of in that Trump kind of way where he's a troll, so he's
Mm,
funny at times. But I thought it was really kind of funny that so you had Bezos was the richest man in the world, and I can't remember how much Elon was supposedly worth back in the day, but it was like before it was like overnight he all of a sudden he was the richest man in the world, and I thought
mm,
that was kind of sudden that he overtook all these other rich billionaires, and he's made most of his kind of gains based on being subsidized by our government to do things.
absolutely.
So yeah, so obviously he's been propped up for a reason, and yeah, given this kind of obviously this about the most prominent place right now outside of Trump to be, you know, having the control of the whole public discourse on X,
Mm,
or used to be Twitter. Yeah, he's in so many not to be trusted. I mean, I don't think that most people are that trustworthy of him. I mean, but again, there's sycophants of all these people, like yeah, including Trump, that they, no matter what he does, regardless if it's against what he said he would do before, they're still fine with it. Uh, you know, he, I think maybe that is kind of like the kind of Hegelian dialect where
yeah.
it seems like Trump and Elon are both kind of chaos agents, and then so they can maybe bring the right wing along a little bit, and then but they cause enough chaos where eventually the pendulum swings the other way. But yeah, I mean, of course, from a Christian perspective, he definitely has like kind of like the Tony Stark vibes from like the
Yes.
Iron Man. He was wearing like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Baphomet costume for Halloween. He's got the Norvis Ordo Seclorum jacket. He he he, he kind of reminds me of all these other kind of billionaires, kind of like Bill Gates or maybe even who was it? Steve Jobs. That they're credited with being like these genius inventors, and then but if you actually look into their history, and they didn't invent anything.
No.
It's like they were given credit for these inventions, and then of course they don't ever tell people that it wasn't them.
Mm.
It seems like to me that they're propped up by people.
Certainly
So that,
seems like that,
mm,
doesn't it? Because
mm.
I'm not aware that Musk has invented anything. He just employs people that are good at it. But do you know about the connection between Gates, his mum, IBM?
I can't remember who was Gates' dad. Gates' dad was like a real big player in something too. I can't remember all the story of Gates, but I do know that he didn't invent anything. He just like had
No.
the companies to buy the patents and stuff like that, and then he gets credit for it.
Yeah, his mum was quite high up in IBM and was involved in the tattooing of the Jews in the Second World War.
Oh wow.
She was involved in that, and a lot of these big companies start off. I mean, look at Jeff Bezos and Amazon and Gates and Microsoft. They always start up in someone's back room or a garage or something.
Yeah.
Then
Mm.
these really humble beginnings. They come from nowhere. One thing I wanted to ask you was, out of all the conspiracies out there, if you remove our favorites, Tartaria, Millennial Reign of Christ, and so on, what is it? what is your favorite conspiracy, or one that you would, if we never were allowed to speak about Tartaria or the millennial reign ever again, but you had to do a podcast tomorrow night on a top conspiracy that's in your mind now and again, what one would it be?
Well, you know, it's funny. It's the one that came to mind right away, and I don't know that I would ever classify it as my favorite one, but it would probably be 9/11. I mean, 9/11. That was kind of that conspiracy kind of at the part in my life that it happened, and when I woke up and I revisited 9/11. That was one of the ones where it just kind of blew me away, like the
Mm,
kind of the insanity that we never looked deeper into with the official narrative. I mean, I know lots of people did, but I didn't. And so I was just right out of college when that happened. And of course, I'm just trying to start my life out. I don't want to know anything. Like, I mean, I would never want to
mm,
believe any of the stuff that could be true about that. But that one is just, I don't know. I hate to say that I laugh about a lot of that stuff, but it's kind of like one of those things where it's like this is staring you right in the face. And some of the official stories about like how the passports are found blocks from the
yeah.
World Trade Centers and things like that, and found in the field in Pennsylvania and stuff like
Mm,
that. Yeah, that one is really yeah, that one is just like it's I would talk more about it on YouTube, but I got in trouble for talking about it on YouTube before.
oh, we
But
better not
I
go
mean
there then.
that's one of the ones I like to talk about. I think that maybe I like to talk about it because it is so hard to talk about. The moon landing stuff is always funny too. I enjoy talking about the moon landing. The,
It's funny because I'd heard a few times that 9/11 um, wasn't quite what we thought it was, with regard to the planes hitting the buildings, that actually was CGI, that never happened. These planes didn't hit. But then I spoke to someone recently whose friend was there and saw the first plane hit. They were working in New York at the time. They saw it happen. So that kind of then, and this is a person called allegedly Dave. He's got quite a big following in the UK on YouTube. Um, so I thought, okay, I kind of this is a trustworthy person. I know that he worked there at the time, but why are people thinking that it could be CGI?
well, I'll tell you why. There's one of the videos where they do show the plane hitting. It looks it, the building has there's no resistance at all. It like did the plane like disappears into the building. And if you ever, of course, they said I actually have done a few podcasts talking about this. Of course, they were over on Rumble now because I couldn't put them on the other one. But if you go look at it, I think there's that guy Richard Gage. He's got a big following talking about that. He did a documentary called, I think it's Architects and Engineers, something about 9/11 truth. And if you actually go look into the construction photos of the World Trade Centers, it's unbelievable. And of course, I have a construction background because I'm a commercial contractor, and we do metal framing, things like that. I've never built anything like, I don't do the structural steel, but I'm familiar with construction. And when I saw the buildings, when I saw the construction photos of them, so they have structural columns all around the elevators, but not just that, the whole skin of the buildings is all structural steel. And of course, when you find out that those were built to withstand the biggest airplane that was around back then, it really makes no sense. Actually, there's a really interesting clip from Trump. He called in on some kind of radio show then, and Trump is obviously familiar with construction in New York City
Yeah.
because he built lots of buildings there. And he was saying that, I can't remember, this was like weeks or months after it happened. And he was saying, I thought it had to have a bomb on there because there's no way it could have got through that steel. Because he was talking about, he's like, the one thing that he was familiar with, he said, if anybody's ever been into the World Trade Center, everybody remembers how small the windows are because they kind of had these really narrow windows because it was like a mesh of structural steel around the whole thing. And when you look at it, yeah, it seems it from my I don't know from I mean I guess I'm not a physicist, I'm not an engineer, but you do see like the pictures of these planes that are
Mm.
aluminum and they hit birds and they dent. And then you look at that building. You know, the taller a building is, the taller the building gets, the stronger the steel needs to be.
Yeah.
So that steel on that building was really, really stiff, really strong. It's hard for me to imagine that it went through it with no resistance.
Mm.
I mean, I would have thought that if if you did that test again, I would have thought that the plane would have smashed against it and crashed down to the street. I don't think it would have went through.
I'm still
Not the whole thing anyways. No way. There's no way that the wings and everything would have made it through without being snapped off.
what was the in the end? What was the? I'm just sort of noticed the time. We'll have to say goodbye in a moment. But what was the narrative behind the third building collapsing?
That's the one they don't really talk about. What
No.
the narrative says that I think they want to say that that I want to say that building 7 was, might have been, they said 5 football fields away, so about 500 yards away from those buildings. And so some debris came off the other two towers and hit that, and it caused office fires. And then supposedly the fires inside the office caused structural members to weaken, and then it collapsed. And I didn't know this, of course, at the time, that there is only 3 buildings in world history, high-rise buildings, skyscrapers, that fell due to fires. And that building, and that was the one that if you watch the video, it falls at like free fall speed. It looks like, I mean, it's like probably the most clear example of like a building that looks like it was controlled demolition,
Yeah.
because you can see it, like it falls from the bottom.
Mm.
You know, like the bottom just is empties out and it falls at free fall speed. And if you go look at that building had, I think, 80 something structural columns that went all the way up through it. It just, I mean, that's the one where they don't talk about it. And I think that when they did the 9/11 report, that wasn't in there because that one didn't suffer terrorism, so they didn't look into that one. Of course,
Yeah.
that's the one that people don't even know about. That how do 3 buildings fall when 2 of them got hit by plane? There's only 2
Yeah.
planes.
And no one does talk about it.
No,
When
they
pe-
don't, because they can't. Because I think that's the one. I think that's the one where if you look into it, I think that there's no reasonable explanation that regular office fires, like like furniture inside the office, was going to catch
Mm.
fire and it was going to burn hot enough to melt structural members in a 47-story skyscraper. I mean, that's the thing. It's like, because it's
Mm.
next to the World Trade Centers that were over 100 stories, you would think that that building doesn't look as big. But I mean, in a place like where I live, 47-story building is huge.
Mm.
And it's not just, and that building wasn't just tall, it was really wide too. That was a big, big building. And there's just, yeah, I mean, there's been countless examples since then. Maybe not countless, but there's been a lot of examples. I know that last year, I want to say that there was a fire in a skyscraper in Japan or China, and the thing burned all day long. And of course, all it did was just burn kind of the skin off the building.
Yeah.
Because, and what would be left would be the structural members that they would not melt.
You don't know who owned the other building, do you?
Oh, I know. We do know that it was Larry Silverstein.
Ah,
He bought all
okay.
3 buildings before that
Right.
summer. The summer before
Right.
that, got insurance on them and for terrorism.
Mm.
And they said Larry Silverstein, he ate breakfast at the World Trade Centers every morning except for one morning.
Yeah.
It was the morning that he was getting a dermatology appointment or something like that. That morning was
This is
not there. It's almost like the story of, was it JP Morgan?
and the Titanic.
Yeah, when he was
Yeah.
like, last minute, nah.
I'm not feeling very
Yeah,
well.
I'm
And then
feeling a
went on
little
holiday
ill.
anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, it's actually, it's worse than even the JP Morgan one, because you eat there every morning for breakfast except for
Mm.
that one morning.
Mm. There was
A
a
little
really weird
suspicion.
uh, conspiracy theory floating around at the time that the people that got out of the Twin Towers first all had an Apple PC or MacBook.
Oh, really? I never heard that one.
Yeah, it was a weird one that was going around. Yeah, the people that were using Apple products got some sort of notification, and they were the ones that were out the building way before anybody else. And that was
Yeah.
floating around for a little bit. I'm conscious of the time. It's nearly 11. Well, what is it here
Mm.
now? It is 11 o'clock at night here.
Yeah.
I'm going to love you and leave you now, Joe.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you so much for giving up a couple of hours of your evening for me. I really appreciate it.
Of course, man. This is great. Time flew by. Always great
It
talking to
did.
you.
Yeah, it did. It did go quickly. Yeah, it's lovely speaking to you again as well. Um, the best place for people to find you is YouTube and Patreon.
Yeah, well, yeah, if you I go by JT Follows GC, on the
Mm,
hat. If you look me up, you'll be able to find me on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. But yeah, if you find me there, you can find me on you can find my link tree, and I have links to everything. Yeah, I'm on Patreon, so I put podcasts regularly on YouTube and the audio podcast. But if you like short stuff, check me out on Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok, and you can see the short stuff. And most of the time it's clips from the podcast. If you're interested in those things, you'll probably be interested in the podcast.
what I'll do is I'll put a link in the description for everybody.
Okay, thank you.
But but thanks again, Joe, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day over there.
You too, man. God bless you, brother.
Thank you. Take care now.